For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means.
Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel.
Tonight's featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Kelby. Tonight we have a gentleman on who is one of the leaders of the the State of Jefferson movement in California. This gentleman's name is Mark Baird, and Mark has been on my program before. He was on last week on another radio show with me, and as I told Kelby earlier, it gave us a pretty good warm-up for tonight's program. So I really want to welcome you, Mark, to the show, and I would like to have you give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself and what the State of Jefferson movement really is.
Well, I'm just a guy. I'm a Christian and a rancher and a father and a husband, and I also spent about 25 years flying all over the world. And as a contract pilot, I went to 6 conflicts for the United States government, so I learned some things about socialism and how we don't want to be from that. And when I look at the government of California, and in fact the government of the United States, I ask myself, what is the proper role of government? And in California, we realize that government overreach has reached a level where it's tyranny and oligarchy, where one state senator pretends to represent 1 million people, and one assemblyman pretends to represent 500,000 people, but really they only represent themselves. They don't oversee the courts. We have runaway courts where injustice is rampant and where the people are denied justice every day. We have a legislature that exempts themselves from the laws that they pass on us, and so we began to ask ourselves, why would we trust a government that doesn't trust us? We decided to do a state split, which is legal under Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution, and it is mandatory under Article 2, Section 1 of the California Constitution, because government serves the people. And when government fails to serve the people, it is our right to alter or reform government anytime the public good demands it. So we, to make a long story short, we went the legislative route and got ignored. So now we're in federal court suing the state of California for lack of representation and dilution of vote, and we hope to backdoor a state that way.
Well, that's a good, really good description of what the State of Jefferson idea evolved from. But let's talk about just exactly how far down the socialist Marxist path the state of California has gone, and why that makes such a difference to rural Californians. Well,
first of all, the rogue agencies, California Department of Fish and Game, they call themselves Cal Wild. We call them Cal Pile, is out denying people the use of their own property. BLM's involved in that. We know from the Hammonds and the Bundy deal in Malheur, and they do the same things in California. The California government has exempted themselves from the show cause provisions of concealed carry. In other words, if you're a lawmaker, you can get a concealed carry permit, but if you're a regular Californian, you probably can't get one. They've denied us the Second Amendment. We pay $1 more a gallon than any state in the nation for gasoline so that the Chinese can continue to pollute and Californians will pay to save the planet. They've mandated solar panels on new homes by 2020. They're going to, Senator Ting from San Francisco wants to ban all semi-automatic weapons. Senator Lara from Bell Gardens wants to allow illegal aliens to have absolutely free health care, but you and I get to pay for it. The citizens of California get to pay for it. The CARB regulations, the diesel regulations that ruined the trucking industry and killed thousands of small businesses in California were made from statistics that were invented by a guy who was not even a PhD. In fact, he later went to jail for fraud, and the government knew those statistics were a fake and a lie, and yet they used them to enact the CARB regulations that practically killed the trucking industry and bankrupted some of my neighbors right here in my town because they couldn't afford new trucks. The government elites tell us that society is so complex that we're not capable of self-rule anymore, and so they have a ruling class that is better educated than we are, they think, and they tell us stupid people how we're going to live, and then they pass laws to make sure that that happens. Jerry Brown says our life is too easy, and because of climate change, our lives have to become worse so that we can feel the pain of saving the environment. Jerry Brown says we're lazy and ungrateful because we don't support the gasoline taxes. Jerry Brown says he does not represent conservatives in this state. In fact, he fights that. And Jerry Brown is in violation of his oath of office, Article 20 in the California Constitution. He's in violation of Article 3, Section 1, which says the United States Constitution is the highest law in the land. And he's in violation of United States Code Title 8, Section 1324. In fact, he's a federal felon for shielding and harboring knowingly illegal aliens. And so is every member of the California legislature that voted for it. So we literally have a gang of felons who are tyrannizing the people of California, and we say no to that, and we say we will not submit. Well,
I think it's really funny that they refer to you and your group as right-wing, well, they call you wing-nuts, but right-wing zealots and alt-right and all these different derogatory terms describing you, but yet your group is the one that's trying to get redress of grievance through the court system and doing it the legitimate way through the court system, when in fact most of what they're doing is it's not even legislatively done, but it's done administratively or regulatory, and they haven't done it through the legitimate process. Why do they think they can get away with that kind of violation of the law and then accuse you of being violators of the law?
Well, it's easy for them to do that, you see, because, Dan, here's the deal. Liberty was a gift to us. We didn't pay for it. In fact, John Adams said that liberty must be protected at all hazards. You have a right to it derived from your maker. And even if that were not true, it was purchased and paid for by your fathers with their ease, their estates, their blood, and their treasure. And we as citizens have failed to do the one job the Constitution of the United States tells us that we have to do, and that is secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. We as citizens have failed to do that. We weren't paying attention. When a lot of these things started, nobody said no. However, we are awake now, and even the dumbest mule can see when the barn's on fire. And we are awake now, and we are acting, and we will not take no for an answer. I want everybody to understand that. We will fight to protect our property and our liberty. We will not submit to tyranny, not by Jerry Brown, not by Sacramento, not by San Francisco, not by Los Angeles, not by anyone. We will not submit. Jefferson is a legal, moral, ethical way of changing the dynamic in this state. However, we will change the dynamic, period. We will not submit to tyranny.
Well, it appears that there are more and more counties in California that want to join in the State of Jefferson movement. I know originally it was mostly just the northern counties of the state, but hasn't there been a certain movement to basically take most of the state with the exception of a little fringe along the coast?
Yeah, there is a movement by Tim Draper who wants to split the state into three, and First of all, his deal won't pass Congress, and as you know, Article 4, Section 3, the state legislature has to agree and Congress has to agree. Tim Draper created 3 economic entities, the one of which he hopes to control is filled with the money and the coastal elites, and he would like to throw rural California under the bus by leaving the southern desert communities under the care of Los Angeles and the northern resource communities under the care of San Francisco and Sacramento. And here's our deal. We may not be able to stop that vote from passing. However, we will not submit to tyranny by San Francisco and Sacramento any more than we would by the rest of California. So even if Draper's deal passes, we will go to Sacramento and we will redraw that boundary. We're not going to allow ourselves to be tyrannized anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you've got in California, you've got some tremendous experiments going on in the San Francisco area, the ABAG, and all these different experiments in UN Agenda 21. And I'd like maybe for you to tell our listeners some of the things that are going on in California that are direct reflections of UN Agenda 21.
Gosh, I hope we've got 5 or 6 hours, but I'll try to hit on I'll hit on the biggest ones. First of all, Cal Wild came up with this program they called an incidental take permit. It was an extortion racket where if you were farming and ranching and you accidentally killed a listed species during your operations, ran over an owl with a tractor, stepped on a coho salmon in the creek, something, it's a $25,000 fine. But under Cal Wild's program called the Incidental Take Permit, you could purchase insurance against that fine. We call that in New York at the mom and pop stores, they call that extortion, where the guy comes in and says, you know, these windows break out here all the time, but for $500 a month, I guarantee yours won't break. The other one is One Bay Area, where 9 counties in the Bay Area were placed under a regional government, and they lost all control over land use planning in their own neighborhood. And this entity that's called One Bay Area can now tell them and force them to have stack and pack housing along transportation corridors and have reduction in use of their automobiles, and in other words, they're denied the use of their property and denied oversight over their own lives. CARB is another one where Dr. Hiram Tran, the liar and the fraud, invented the P2M regulations for diesel emissions, and literally they were absolutely a lie and a fraud, and he invented them just out of thin air. And yet the state of California is using that to restrict the types of diesel fuel for sale and restrict the type of engines that people can use and force, technically I should get all new machinery for my ranch, but I just told them to pound sand. I'm not doing it. And really the whole thing was a lie. The Northwest Forest Plan and the national monuments that Obama put into place is an attempt at the wildlife corridors that are on the Agenda 21 map. And when you look at that map and superimpose those on these huge multi-100,000 acre land preserves where people don't have say over their property and what happens to it, those are the rewilding corridors in the Agenda 21 map. And now California wants to regulate the use of your tap water and tax the use of your tap water. And there's a bill in the hopper right now to limit people to less than 50 gallons a day of tap water. And if you use more than that, you're denying the environment its due, and you can be fined or jailed or whatever kind of penalty they want to come up with. And then they want to deny the people the use of arms so that we can resist this tyranny. And I could go on and on and on.
Well, actually, I hope you do, because I think our listeners a lot of times don't realize just exactly how far over the edge the state of California has gone. And when you're talking about the One Bay Area, I know Michael Shaw's a good friend of mine, and he's been on our radio show before. But one of the things with ABAG is that most of those governments are councils of government, and they're appointed rather than being elective positions. What's happened to elective positions in California?
Well, I mean, when you elect people, they're accountable to the electorate by Constitution. But when they're appointed, apparently, they're not accountable to anyone because we don't have enough legislators to oversee the 577 state boards and agencies that we have. For example, we have a board of judicial review, and that board of judicial review is supposed to pay attention to how judges behave and censure the bad judges. Well, in the 50 or so years it's been in existence, it's never censured a judge and it's never been audited. We don't even, the people of this state who pay taxes and pay the budget for that agency, we don't even know if those guys show up to work. And you can repeat that 577 times, that statement. We don't audit those people. We don't know whether they show up to work. We don't know what they do for a living. But what we do know is when they subjugate, it is we who are being subjugated. And that's one thing about progressives. They really love for the people to be their playthings for every social engineering experiment that they imagine will improve governance, and a la Woodrow Wilson. You know, I think it was Jerry Brown, he was speaking in front of the Dutch Parliament, and he said, we really need to be brainwashed to embrace climate change. Now, can you imagine what Samuel Adams would have said back to him? He would have said, wait a minute, let me get my gun and we'll talk about that. And Jerry Brown says that, you know, it really, we need a total brainwashing. We have it too easy. We're all lazy and we're ungrateful because we object to gas taxes. We're lazy and ungrateful because we're being taxed into submission. And I believe it was John Marshall in a Maryland case that said, the power to tax is the power to destroy. And in the state of California, they're trying to destroy the ability of the citizens to resist by taxing us so heavily that literally all you have time to do is work to pay your taxes.
Yeah. Well, you're probably the most heavily taxed state in the union, and you've got some pretty stiff competition between Illinois and New York. But the fact is that Californians are moving by the droves to other states in the West, and frankly, I wish they wouldn't do that because the ones that are moving here are the ones that want to bring California with them.
Well, you know, you got to ask yourself, first of all, are they fleeing California because the socialist state they've created is just the best place on earth to be? And if that's the case, why are they running to places like Montana and Wyoming and Idaho, free states? But what really kills me is they take these progressive ideals with them. You know, we've just got to be give everybody everything. We've just got to be inclusive. We can't have borders. Why on earth would you run from California where you've got everything that you want here? You know, you've got a state with no borders where illegal aliens get free health care, where illegal aliens, and this one really kills me, it is legal for an illegal alien to become a court officer and to support and defend the Constitution, which they violated to come here in the first place. Where do you think their loyalty lies when they become attorneys who have sworn to uphold the law that they violated to come here in the first place?
That's amazing.
Well, I'd like to ask Kate Steinley's dad what he thinks about that, but I'm pretty sure I already know.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, Mark, the one thing, too, that comes out very clearly on this is that none of these people, or very few of these people, are holding elective office. Most of them are in appointed positions, and California's got a huge deficit such as it has because so many of these employees are paid quite well, and they have incredible retirement funds.
Yes, they do. And in fact, the CalPERS system, I believe at the last time I really researched this, was around $1.2 trillion in debt. So California has about $500, $600, $700 million, or $billion, I'm sorry, not million, $1 billion of long-term debt right now. CalPERS, the unfunded liability, is around $1.2, $1.3 trillion. So California has just north of $1.5 trillion in debt. And for those of you that can't picture that number, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion dollars, and $1 billion is 1,000 million dollars. And so it's such a ridiculous number. And these guys look at themselves and they say, "Gosh, aren't we just doing a great job?"
Yeah, they do. And your income tax, isn't your state income tax in California close to 16%?
Yeah, it depends on your bracket, but it's pretty close to 16%. You can't fault businesses for running. Quite frankly, if I could pick up my business and move to another state, I probably would too. But my wife and I decided to stay and fight, because if you won't fight here, where will you fight? And if you won't fight now, when will you fight? So we decided to stay and fight and take back the state that I remember being born in, and I remember it being a pretty great place.
Oh, yeah, you've got one of the most beautiful states in the world as far as your geography. If it just wasn't so full of Marxists. I have to use a comment, your comment about how they love this utopia that they create until they have to deal with it, and then all of a sudden they don't like it. One of my favorite terms is that socialists love humanity. They just hate humans.
Yeah, I like that. I may steal that line from you. It's very true. And, Margaret Thatcher said that socialism is great until you run out of everybody else's money. And like I said before, I've flown all over the world. I've seen socialism. I remember when Venezuela wasn't a bad place to live. It was a nice country. And now it is absolutely a pest hole where people are eating dead rats and garbage to try to stay alive. That's socialism. Now, remember, Venezuela has more oil than any single country on earth, more oil reserves. And people are eating garbage to stay alive in the socialist paradise of Venezuela. MS-13 got its start in Honduras and El Salvador, and now they're exporting these soldiers to the United States. And the socialist, Nancy Pelosi, says, well, they have a spark of divinity in them. Well, I wonder if the two young ladies who were hacked to death with machetes on Long Island think so. I wonder if the MS-13 guy that just got life for murder, and by the way, his name was Animal, if he has a spark of divinity in him somewhere. Somehow I doubt it. I'll tell you, God forgives, but you got to ask for forgiveness first, and these people don't want it. Their motto is to rape, rob, and control. That's their motto. And we're allowing them in across the border in California. We don't know who they are. We don't care. Everybody's welcome. Everybody gets free services, in-state tuition, free medical care. You can become a state officer in a state board and agency. You can become a lawyer. You can get a driver's license. And there's one city in Southern California that wants to allow illegal aliens to vote in school board elections, which is the opening shot to giving illegals the vote in California.
Mm-hmm. Sure is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I want you to maybe expand a little bit on your lawsuit and give our listeners a really, really good understanding of how that whole lawsuit kind of evolved and where you're at in the courts. I want our listeners to understand that what you're doing is totally lawful and legal, and that you're trying to follow the correct ways through the court system to redress grievance.
Yeah, what we did is, as everyone knows, there are three branches of government. So in order to redress a grievance, which you have the First Amendment right to petition your government for redress of grievance, and it's an absolute right, it's an inalienable right. And so what we did first was we went to the legislature, and we have now 23 counties. Mariposa and Stanislaus counties have declarations, and probably on June 15th, we're going to go down to Sacramento and record those with the Secretary of State in both houses of legislature. So we now have 23 counties with declarations to withdraw from the state of California under Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. And that says, nor shall a state be formed from the territory of an existing state or two adjoining states unless Congress agrees and the state legislature agrees. So we petitioned the legislature and absolutely were ignored. Even the people who swore to serve us in the North State ignored us, because even these so-called Republicans have the little crown pulled tight down on their head, and they see that if we got the state of Jefferson, the people would regain power and the oligarchy would lose power, and they hate that. And let me tell you, a Democrat is a snake, like a rattlesnake. And you can tell what it is just by looking at it. It's got the triangular shaped head, the eyes are in front, like a viper, got the rattle. You know what it's going to do. Republicans are even worse, because they'll sit in front of you and swear to support and defend the Constitution with their very lives, and then they'll turn around and vote against it every single time. So both political parties in this state hate us. They're very close to being the same political party. They don't do anything. Republicans haven't won a state office in years. They don't do a single thing except get the loot. So we were ignored by the legislature after hundreds of thousands of emails, hundreds of thousands of telephone calls, thousands of personal visits, and 21 declarations. They did nothing. So then we appealed to the executive branch. We made an appointment with Governor Brown, and we were going to present him with a booklet about Jefferson, why we need to do it, why we think it's important, and why we wanted him to represent the people of this state and help us at least start the dialogue. We weren't expecting Governor Brown to give us anything, but what we were expecting him to do was listen and at least have a conversation about it. So we showed up at the Capitol, and I felt pretty bad. 300-400 of us went into Governor Brown's office, and the CHP officer comes out. I felt kind of bad for the guy. And he knew we had an appointment. He knew what time it was. He knew we were on time. All we were going to do was give the governor's representative our papers. And he went in the office and came back out and went in and came back out. And then he went in and came back out again. And he says, "I'm sorry, no one can take your information because they're doing," and this is a quote, by the way, "they're doing really important stuff in there today, and they just don't have time for you." And I repeated it to him. I said, "They're doing really important stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, they're doing really important stuff, and no one can come out and take your information." I said, "So what you're trying to tell me is that not even the secretary that empties the wastebaskets in the legislative office and the executive office that has sworn to represent the people of this state can even take 2 minutes to come out here and grab a stack of papers and go in that office and then throw the papers away without even looking at them." And he just stood there with this really pained, embarrassed look on his face, and he said, "I'm sorry, but, I'm just a messenger." And so we left. The executive branch has been exhausted. We've approached them. They rejected us. So now we only have one branch of government left, and that's the court. Now, Edmund Coke said in the 1600s that all courts are corrupt because the judge knows who pays them. And we know that too. But we have to exhaust all legal, moral, and ethical means before we result to self-help. And that's very important, this concept of self-help. So in the court system now, what we've done is we have petitioned the federal court and sued the state of California for lack of representation and dilution of vote. Our case is really easy to prove. We can prove that in the 1879 convention, Constitutional Convention, the state of California actually capped the number of representatives at 120 to deny certain groups of people access to political power. They did it in order to, quote, get rid of the Chinese. And Article 19 of the 1879 convention made it a felony to hire a Chinese person. So that's where we are with the suit. We sued them for lack of representation and dilution of vote, and we filed our complaint. And this federal judge, who is an Obama appointee, she's a Democrat. She worked for the Sacramento City Council before and as a lifelong California Democrat. She has dismissed our complaint twice because she says that, yes, although you don't have any representation, since all the people of California are equally screwed, there's nothing the court can do about it. They call that a general harm. So we went back and said, no. We filed the complaint based upon denying groups of individuals access to power. That's an individual harm, not a general harm. In addition to that, Citizens United versus the House of Representatives, Supreme Court case says all you have to be is an individual voter to have harm because you have a material interest to maintain the value of your vote. We've pointed out Shapiro versus McManus, where the Supreme Court tells her that whenever there's a lack of representation case, she has to ask for a three-judge court, and any result of an action from a three-judge court goes directly to the United States Supreme Court. So she's trying to deny the people their day in court so that our case won't make it to the United States Supreme Court, because if we get our three-judge panel, it doesn't matter whether we win or lose, we still go to the United States Supreme Court, a court which we hope and pray is the least corrupt court in the country, where we might get a fair hearing. We don't know, but it's possible. So anyway, that's what our lawsuit is going. And now we had a hearing on June the 1st, and the judge just vacated that hearing. She doesn't want to have oral argument because she doesn't want that courtroom filled with the people she's sworn to serve. That way, if she does something illegal, she won't have to do it in the light of day. We have several consultants who have joined us, one of which is probably the only conservative on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. He's the former Chief Magistrate Alex Kaczynski, and he said that this is cutting-edge constitutional law. This case needs to be heard, and it needs to be won. And he's now helping us with our paperwork, so we think this judge might be running a little scared. She's going to attempt to deny us our day in court. We're not going to allow that. Now, let's say the court utterly rejects us and won't even give us our day in court. We have a constitution in California that has been violated by the very people who have sworn to serve the people of California. That is a social contract, but it's a contract nonetheless. Once the executive and the legislative branch have breached that contract, the contract now becomes null and void, just like any contract. Once there's a breach of contract, the contract's null and void, and you're free to seek self-help. So if we are denied our day in court, we will then seek a self-remedy to the situation we find ourselves in, and we don't know what form that remedy might take yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Mark, explain too how the rural and the urban areas, the disproportionate amount of representation in the urban areas because of the way the your legislative seats and your Senate seats are divided in California, and why the rural people are getting so upset about the lack of representation.
Well, because we had a situation in California like many states did. In 1928, we passed Proposition 26, which roughly gave each county a state senator. California worked back then because the rural counties, there are about 38 rural counties and about 20 urban counties. The rural counties controlled the Senate, and the urban counties controlled the Assembly. But the result was the really dumb things never made it to the finish line because the Senate was a check on the unbridled power of the mob, I guess you could say, in the Assembly. So now in 1962, there started with Chief Justice Earl Warren. He was what Eisenhower called the worst damn fool mistake he ever made. Chief Justice Earl Warren went full progressive. And he started with a case called Baker versus Carr, where he said that the federal court, and remind yourself that Article 3 courts of the United States Constitution have equity over, they have jurisdiction over matters of equity and law pursuant to the Constitution. They do not have the power to change the Constitution. But Warren has never read the Constitution, so he just went ahead and did whatever he wanted. And he's never read the California Constitution either, and I'll prove that. So what Warren did was he gave the federal court the power to intervene in the election processes of the very entities that created the federal government. He gave the object of the contract power over the contract itself, which is unlawful and unconstitutional. But he did it, and nobody stopped him. Then in 1963, there was a case called Gray versus Sanders, where Earl Warren again said that all state elections will be conducted by the principle that he invented called one man, one vote. And that means that there have to be districts that are approximately equal, and everybody in them gets to vote for a certain legislative person, and that's how both houses in all the states will work. Well, that changed the way about 30 state legislatures did business, because there were about 30 states that worked the same way as California did, where counties had a state senator and then population controlled the assembly. So then in 1964, 30 court challenges later, after the Westerbury or the Grace case, Warren had the Reynolds versus Sims case, where he said all state elections will be conducted by apportionment schemes supervised, and approved by the federal court. That was the end of state sovereignty. States no longer had control over the way they elected state officials. The federal court has all the power now, and nobody stopped him. Well, of course, that changed California forever, because now the Senate became a rubber stamp for the Assembly. They're both controlled by Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Sacramento. And so whatever the people, in fact, the state of Jefferson has one state senator, and Los Angeles County has 11. The state of Jefferson literally only has 6 state-level representatives in 1/3 of the landmass of the state. And if you count the representatives that Los Angeles has in both houses, I believe it's around 24 or 25 in one county. So if you squint and look down the road, you could see a time when the cities grow faster than the country, than the rural areas. You could see a time where maybe 3 or 4 counties would have 115 assembly or representatives, and the other 55 counties would have 4. So this question is going to be asked in court again. One senator can't represent 1 million people. He doesn't care what you think. He doesn't care how you vote. All he cares about is the money. And what we in Jefferson want to do is suck the money out of the politics by making the district so small that guy will be afraid of his voters. And Thomas Jefferson said, government afraid of their people is democracy, and people afraid of the government is tyranny. Well, we have tyranny in California, and we want to restore a constitutional republic in Jefferson.
Well, and I know there are a lot of people in government that would love to change the 2 senators per state dynamic, but that was exactly the reason that the founders did it, was to assure that the less populous states would still have representation and still have a seat at the table. And I also know that's why they're trying to get rid of the Electoral College, too.
Yeah, it is, because that would fundamentally change our republic into a pure democracy, and pure democracy is nothing but the mob, and the French Revolution proved that, and so have so many governments all over the planet. You look at what's happening in South Africa right now. The government is on a program approved by the voters, the majority rules in South Africa, and they are on a program right now to murder and to steal land from farmers without compensation, but majority rule says it's the law. Well, it's the law, isn't it? So if we murder you, it's the law. I mean, in the French Revolution, they legalized murder with the guillotine. The majority voted on it. Well, murder's okay because we voted on it, right? And in constitutional republic, minority maintained rights are above government's policy table. They are the inalienable, the God-given rights. They are absolute rights, and government has no authority over those rights. And that's what we've lost in California. And my friends, we are losing that nationwide faster than you can imagine. And unless we all stand up, it's going to be too late.
It will. And you're exactly right. That loss of representation is something that, under a republic, we live by rule of law, which means that the minority is protected. And under democracy, as you say, it's mob rule. So whichever the largest group has all the power, and they can literally destroy anybody they want.
Yeah, they do have the power to do that, and they have the power to do it lawfully, and they're trying to do it to the Second Amendment right now. I mean, they're trying to vilify you. They're trying to vilify the National Rifle Association as a terrorist organization when really it's made up of its 5.5 or 6 million members who agree on policy decisions, and we pay our dues in order to see that those policy decisions are carried out. So really the National Rifle Association is no different than any political union where people agree on what should happen and they want those things to happen, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, and they're willing to band together to support one another. And what we need a republic, and we need a constitutional republic group where we all start banding together for liberty. I mean, we've got to do that because we're losing our liberty faster than we can imagine.
Well, Mark, I have to say you do a very good job of articulating exactly what the State of Jefferson movement is, and I'm extremely pleased to have you on the show so that you can define that to our listeners, because if they listen to the lamestream media, you would think that everybody that disagrees with the federal government on any issue are just a bunch of right-wing nuts.
Oh yeah, I agree, and the problem with that is that the mass of people in the cities, I've got to tell you, Dan, we're outnumbered by a very, very large margin. I mean, we're way outnumbered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've got to stand up, and we don't have much time. We need to really stand up right now. We do, and you're absolutely right. Most of those people have no idea how important agriculture is to their survival. And, as far as they're concerned, agriculture is just kind of a quaint hobby that people out in the country follow, and they don't realize just exactly how much of their independence they're going to lose if agriculture goes down the tubes. Well, California used to feed the world. We supply about 70 or 80% of all the produce and the nuts and a lot of the row crops for this nation, and the governor is killing that industry just as quickly as he can. He's trying to deprive those people of water, guys like me and guys in the Central Valley that really grow a tremendous amount of tonnage and food. And if he gets away with that, everybody's life's going to get more expensive. It's funny because I think people, they don't really consider their liberty until they get to the gas station and they say, gosh, why is it I don't have any money left? Why is this gasoline so expensive? Well, I'll tell you. It's because people in Sacramento want it to be so, and they know you're going to pay. And you're going to pay and pay and pay until you can't pay anymore. That's their goal. They're going to regulate services next, where if you call a plumber, there's going to be a tax. If you go to the barber, you're going to have to pay a tax. They want a tax on tap water. Can you imagine that the water that comes out of your well, and they want to put a meter on your well so they can tax and regulate how many gallons of water you get out of the ground behind your house? Those are the things we're fighting, everybody, and they're coming your way because every Democrat in the United States is watching California to see what they succeed in getting away with. And once they get away with it, then Katie, bar the door, they'll take it to other states. Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely right. They've been talking about that through UN Agenda 21 for a very long time, how every drop of water will be regulated and it will be metered. And you'll be allocated so much water, it doesn't matter that you drilled that well or in some cases even hand dug that well, and that water has been yours by right for who knows how many generations. They want to control every drop of water on the planet, and that is the new gold of the West, and that is what they're using in California to destroy agriculture. Yeah, it is. And when you look back, if you control the water, you control the land, and if you control the land, you control the people on the land. Quite frankly, this has nothing to do with guns. It has to do with control. It has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with control. It has nothing to do with the water. It has to do with control. What the progressive Democrats want in California and in the nation at large is control, absolute control, 100% control over every breath you take, every step you make, every nickel you have, and where that nickel comes from and where it goes in the end and what you use it for. I mean, even Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire New York guy who's funding all these gun grabber groups, he just recently said that it's acceptable. It's okay to tax poor people because we have to make decisions for them. They're too dumb to conduct their own lives, and we have to tax their sugary drinks because it's either pay your taxes and pay more taxes, or you might die early from drinking too much Pepsi or something. I mean, these morons actually believe their own agenda. They believe that their goal of absolute control is the only way to run the earth, that people have no sense of life or liberty or property, and therefore we don't deserve to govern ourselves. And I'm telling you, folks, stock up on the ammo, get your guns oiled up. I'm not saying we're going to need them, but it looks like we might.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. If you want to run into somebody that has an incredible ego and somehow thinks that they're smarter than the rest of the world, run into a progressive socialist, run into a liberal, because, brother, they believe that they are so much smarter than the rest of us, and they ought to be controlling and deciding everything for us because we're just not smart enough to take care of ourselves.
You know, that started with Woodrow Wilson. He believed that we needed a ruling elite to include himself, of course, at the top of the heap. And then we needed a really well-educated class of what he called bureaucrats, and they would run the world, essentially. And then we have all the regular people who are too dumb to conduct their own lives, and they're the workers, and they wash the rich people's dishes and mow their lawns and buy the things that they're told to buy and vote the way they're told to vote. And that's how Woodrow Wilson, one of the first progressives, saw the world. And let me tell you, it's going that way. Franklin Roosevelt followed it up with the New Deal, what he called the New Deal. Johnson followed up on the New Deal with the Great Society. And what he did was he created what I call the grand consensus, where people, when they vote, expect the government to fix everything for them and give them stuff in the process. We never had that concept in the 1800s. The government wasn't responsible to give you things. But now, in the 20th century, we came to a place where the vast majority of people expect the government to give them the things that they want and need, and they shouldn't have to work for them, and they shouldn't have to follow the rules to get them, and they shouldn't have to take any risk, because if you can have a vacation, everybody should have a vacation, even if they can't afford it. And we're just going on, and then Obama went further with, Johnson created Medicare, Roosevelt created Social Security, and now Obama created Obamacare. And what it is that it's this cradle-to-grave nanny state where you don't have to make any decisions, and it's all good. I'm good, you're good, everybody's good, it's all good. There is no wrong, there is no God. Look to government for everything you want and need.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right on the money. And you mentioned South Africa, and I happen to be friends with several people who have written books about South Africa and who are from South Africa. And if you want to see a perfect example of how to spoil a modern industrial society, South Africa is the poster child. They've gone from number 14 in the world in per capita income to now being almost a third world country.
Yeah. And so many farmers have been murdered on their own farms. It's absolutely horrid. And you don't hear a thing about it in the news.
No, that's right. And it's amazing, but in South Africa, the ruling parties there can openly talk about white genocide, killing the Boers, and getting rid of the white farmers, and they get away with it in the world court, in the world court of public opinion. They get away with the most racist, bigoted, nasty things you can imagine. And why in the world would anybody allow that kind of nonsense? And then we're following suit. We're doing the same thing.
Well, I mean, in South Africa, it's easy. majority rules. They don't have a constitutional republic. They have a, quote, democracy, and the majority voted to kill and murder people and take their land without compensation, and they don't care what you look like, and they don't care who you are because they're going to take it. And if you resist, you'll be murdered and raped and dismembered and tortured probably. The majority says that's okay. So, majority rules, right? And that's what progressives would like the United States to be like. In fact, they're already trying to do that, where they target people who they don't disagree with, and they call it hate speech. Look at Ben Shapiro and all of the conservative speakers that have been going around to these colleges. And since progressives are firmly in charge of our children's education, which is horrifying to me, all of our children are being educated in the socialist progressive model and the communist model. And they target conservatives and call it hate speech, when really it's just an opposing viewpoint.
Right, you're exactly right. And that is one of the communist planks, is to take the possessions of resistors to the movement. And that's happening more and more. We saw that happening. Initially, they tried to claim it was drug-related stuff, where they could go in and raid a house and take the property, and you couldn't get that property back until after you proved yourself innocent in your day in court. And even then, it was difficult to get your property back. A lot of times you couldn't. That is exactly what's been happening over the last 40 years in our country. And that leads me to maybe my final question for you, and that is, how in the world are we going to win this country back? How can we get our citizens to get off their derriere and start participating in our constitutional republic?
Well, the answer to that, Dan, is it is possible. It can be done. I'm a glass is half full kind of guy. I wouldn't be talking to you if I didn't think we could win. Here's what we did here. We learned to win in our own backyard. We got together a group of people who wants to do something, and we started with what a lot of people call their county board of commissioners. We call it a board of supervisors here. We started with them. We figured out which ones were not constitutionalists, and we voted them out of office, and we replaced them with constitutionalists, sometimes our own people. My supervisor is one of the guys that actually helped to start this mess. So we got our county to where they were constitutional thinkers, and then we went to other counties and we organized groups there, and all we did was we taught them how we did it. We didn't go do it for them. We didn't go tell people you have to join us. What we did was we said, this is what we're doing. Would you like to learn how we did it? And everybody, of course, says, well, yeah, we want liberty too. So we now have a coalition of 23 counties where people are liberty-minded. We still have our problems. We're not 100% effective, but, we're probably batting about 500, but that's still pretty good. And now we have enough horsepower to turn to the state, and we're going to yank the rug out from under business as usual Sacramento if they don't let us go. So they have two choices: let us go, or we're going to fight and fight and fight until that system of oligarchy and crookedness they've built collapses around their ears. And now that we control almost half the counties in California, we're probably going to win. And once we do that, then we will go to other states and we'll teach them how we did it in our state. And if we can get enough states on board with constitutional thinking and constitutional republic, true constitutional republic, with limited government that's small and close to the people and stays within the boundaries specified in its constitution, then we can turn to the federal government and demand constitutional behavior out of the federal government. But you start by cleaning up your mess in your own backyard. Start with your own city council. Start with your county commissioners, your board of supervisors. If anyone wants to know how to do this, please give them my cell phone number. I will talk to anyone, any time of the day or night. I will travel anywhere I have to spread this message. I don't ask for speaking fees. I don't ask for money. I don't get anything out of this except liberty. But I will help you. If you really want liberty in your community or your state, I will try to help you get started. But I don't just want to go and be an entertaining speaker. If you want help and you're going to do something, I will help you. But you've got to have some action plan. You've got to be willing to take action, because no one is going to do this for you.
That's right. And they've got to be willing to put their pound of flesh into the mix, because
that's right.
They've got to realize that liberty is not free, and it really does require effort to be a free people. John Adams certainly stated that well. Okay, Mark, would you give our listeners information on the best ways to contact you and best ways to find out more about the State of Jefferson movement?
Yeah, the State of Jefferson website is S as in Sam, OJ51.org. And there's a contribute button. Lawsuits cost a lot of money. And if we win this lawsuit, it is going to really, really cause some trouble for Sacramento. So please, if you can afford to help us, even if it's $2, please do. If you can't afford to help us, God bless you. And we'll ask for help. Maybe you can show up another time and help us demonstrate or rally or something. If people want to contact me, my email address is mcbair@icloud.com. That's mcbair@icloud.com. Write me a letter. If you want to try to start a committee, if you want to try to start a liberty movement in your community, please get in touch with me, and I'll tell you what I know. I don't know everything, but I do know some of the things that we did that worked, and a lot of the things that we did that didn't work.
Well, I'll tell you, Mark, just listening to you, you know oceans more than most people, and you certainly are well versed on the law. You understand exactly what drives our law and our Constitution. And I'm really, really pleased that you would be willing to come on our radio show and talk to our listeners about it, because I think more and more people in our nation are getting to the point where they're desperate. And thank God they're desperate, because it took that much. Because it's been too easy for too long, and I'm actually grateful, and I pray every night that people will be awakened to what's going on around them and actually get off their duff and do something.
You know, liberty has a price. We know that. But it also has an ongoing cost. And if we don't pay that bill on the installment plan, we're going to be forced to pay it in a lump sum. And that plan, that cost is eternal vigilance. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We've stopped doing that. We need to start paying attention. We need to start demanding constitutional behavior from everyone in government who has sworn an oath to serve us, we the people. We have all the power. We've always had it. We just have to start using it again.
No, you're right. And I liken it to someone having a garden. If you don't tend that garden and you don't pull the weeds and you don't water it, pretty soon you're not going to have a garden, and that's really what's happened with our government, with our republic. We've treated it like a weedy garden, and we've failed to be diligent. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for being our guest. You've been a terrific guest on tonight's show, and I hope that you'll come back and visit with us again sometime soon.
Well, I'd love to do that, Dan. God bless you, and thank you so much for your work. And as soon as we get any kind of ruling on the three-judge court out of this Judge Mueller from California's federal court for the Eastern District, I'd like to come on and tell the listeners about it. We have a lot of high-powered help. I think we're going to win, and I would be very glad to come on and report about that when it happens.
I would be thrilled to have you back on if you would just please stay in touch with me. I would be absolutely thrilled to be able to report that. Well, again, thank you, Mark. And with that, Kelby, I turn the show back over to you, and I thank our listeners for joining us for another week of Connecting the Dots.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.